Good afternoon. I still have a very hard time believing that I'm standing in front of this Pan IIT group. It brings back memories of being in PH 301 with Professor Kamath. And for those of you who might remember that moment, it was a moment when I never thought I would graduate from IIT Bombay. Let alone stand here today giving this lecture, so it just proves that surviving IIT is probably the best thing that you can ever accomplish in life, which is the only thing that I feel good about having done. But you know, I had the opportunity, I graduated from IIT Bombay in 1984, came to MIT, which is where I went to graduate school from 84 to 88. Just a few years ago, I went back for my 25th year reunion at IIT Bombay. And I want to start with this little personal observation because it tells you a lot about, in some ways, what I want to talk about today, which is this move from what I think we're living through. A world which was very much defined for the last 100 years as an American century to what I think we now live in, which is a global century. So when I graduated from IIT Bombay in 1984, at our reunion, we were very fortunate. About 70% of our class had come back. And when we looked at who was back, we discovered that somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of our class had come to the United States. So the vast majority of my class had come to the United States. And if we looked at where the people were in terms of where they had decided to settle and build their careers and do remarkable things, it was quite an extraordinary group of people. The vast majority of those people had in fact stayed in the United States. So not only had they come to the United States, at least by our 25th reunion, 90% of the people who had come here had in fact stayed here. So I went to Hostel 7, which is where I was in IIT Bombay, and I asked the current class. There were people there. I said, how many students from this last class that graduated in 2009 went to the United States? And I was surprised that the number, at least that was reported to me, was less than a quarter. So less than a quarter of the class, in fact, had gone abroad, particularly in the United States for their first, right after they graduated from IIT Bombay. Fast forward, I started at Harvard Business School in 1988. As you know, at Harvard Business School, we teach by the case method. So with a span of 2 years, the average student at Harvard Business School will read about 500 cases. So when I came to Harvard Business School in 1988, 25% of our class was international. So it's not like the class was an entirely American class. It was still a very global class. But 95% of all of our cases that a student would take over the course of their 2 years at Harvard Business School, the 500 cases, were US cases. Now you would think that in a class that had 25% of the class that was international, someone would protest. Someone would say that this is not the education that I want. Yet, nobody protested. Why? Because in 1988, the vast majority of our students who came to Harvard Business School wanted to understand America. This was the place that they thought was the epicenter of business. It was where the best business practices were. It was where the best companies were. It was where management thinking was considered to be at the cutting edge. So nobody was really concerned about the fact that our curriculum was so American. I often say that Harvard Business School, for its first 100 years, was a great American institution in a great American century. And we benefited immensely from that. Of the students that we had that were international in 1988, 90% of our international students took their first job in the United States. Almost none of our American students took a job anywhere outside of the United States, except the few who went to financial services companies, American financial services companies in London. That was the nature of what the world looked like. So here we are. If you look at what happened to the graduating class of last year, 24 years later. So our class has become more international. We have 34% more students, 34% international students now. But what is remarkable is that 50% of our international students now take their first job back outside of the United States. And even 10% of our American students now have taken jobs in other parts of the world. And it's not in London. So it's very, very clear if you just look at where the best and brightest are betting their own human capital. I think that becomes very often an indicator of where people think the future is. The flows of where human capital go, in my mind, are always a leading indicator of where the world is going. And those flows, at least unambiguously to me, suggest that we are moving into a world which will become a global century. And this global century will certainly be a century in which America will play a very important role. And I promise you it's not going to become a Chinese century. It's going to be a world in which there will be, China will play an important role. India will play an important role. But we would be remiss to just think about those places that we often think about. I was in Brazil this summer, and I can tell you that there's an optimism and a sense of energy there that is quite remarkable. And you can go in various parts of the world, and I think you will find that both extraordinary human capital is being developed all over the world now. And these parts of the world are becoming so exciting. This is the part that John was making, that as we see these peaks developing in this now increasingly smaller world, these peaks will attract human capital from all parts of the world, from the IITs. So I would not be surprised if the next generation of IIT students didn't just decide to stay in India, where there's a lot of opportunities, but some of them might decide to go to China, some of them might decide to go to Brazil, some of them might still come to the United States, some of them may go to other parts of the world, and that's where human capital might flow, just as we're seeing all over the world. So if you think about this new global century, how might you think about the major competitive dynamics that we will have to prepare for if we move into this new global century? I'll give you a very simple framework that at least I have found helpful, that comes from the work that we've been doing at Harvard Business School. Last year, 40% of our cases became global cases, from 5% when I joined the school. And if you look at what these global cases reveal, they suggest that you can think of global competition in terms of three axes. The first is that there's always competition that is fought on the basis of efficiency. Who can make stuff of the same quality cheaper? And if you look at that, the world has constantly been moving. In the 1980s, we saw Japan first begin to challenge America in a serious way in terms of starting to produce goods and services of equal quality. Initially, we thought they were of inferior quality, but then we discovered that they were very much of equal quality, if not superior quality, at lower prices. Then we saw that efficiency frontier move to Korea, then we saw that efficiency frontier move to Taiwan. And India had its place in that efficiency frontier as well. Today, everybody believes that efficiency frontier resides in China. But let me assure you that the one thing that we know about the efficiency frontier is that wherever it is today, it is not going to be there tomorrow. The efficiency frontier will keep moving. I'll give you a small story. I was in China last summer, and I had the opportunity to talk to Victor Fung, who's one of our graduates and runs Li & Fung, which is a large trading company in China. And at just about that time, Foxconn, which is the company that makes all of our iPhones, is the single largest factory under one roof in the world, had just had these 20 suicides that had occurred in its plants in Shenzhen. And so overnight, in response to this anxiety about what would happen to their workers, they had raised wages, they had doubled wages. This is not, by the way, the first time that happened. In America, exactly that same moment had happened when Henry Ford did that at the Ford Motor Company when he was manufacturing Ford Model Ts at the turn of the century. So overnight he doubled wages. So we have seen this story before, and it happened in China just while I was there. So Victor Fung says to me, he says, Nitin, what do you think happened as soon as Foxconn announced this news? What do you think happened to the P&Gs of the world? What do you think happened to people who were always looking to us as part of their supply chain? He says, within 5 days, I had calls where people were saying, who's your biggest supplier in Cambodia? Who's your biggest supplier in Vietnam? And who's your biggest supplier in Bangladesh? The world was already moving. There was already a sense in which the efficiency frontier had moved just in response to that one moment. Now, China is still an extraordinary place in terms of manufacturing. It's not like the world will move to another place very quickly, but it's worth realizing that in the next 20 years, 300 million people will enter the global labor force with the education that an American manufacturing person used to have. They'll have high school or somewhere between high school and college education. And these people will work for cheaper wages than wherever people are working today. And as manufacturing technology becomes commoditized, these factories can move in any part of the world and become as productive as factories anywhere else. So we need to all be prepared for this one eventuality, that as you think about the world of global competition, wherever you see the efficiency frontier today, I promise you that efficiency frontier will keep moving in the time ahead. So this is one dynamic that has become very apparent as we've come to understand this new global century. The other dynamic that has become profoundly important to understand is that growth in the world in the 20th century was driven by the US and European consumer. And it's very clear that while the US and European consumer will remain an important part of consumption in the time ahead, consumers in emerging markets will in fact be very important to anything that we imagine in terms of the growth of the world going forward. And the nature of demand for these consumers is not exactly the same as what people demanded here. So there will continue to be a need to fight not just on efficiency, but on local responsiveness. People who figure out how to create products and services that uniquely appeal to the local markets and the local market conditions in various economies all around the world. The best example I can give you is a product that some of you might be familiar with called the Tata Ace. Everybody thinks about the Tata Nano, but frankly that's been a dud. The real success in the Tata Motors company has been this product called the Tata Ace. It's a small truck. It's a truck that's replaced these three-wheeler rickshaws that used to be piled up and were dangerous hazards in terms of moving goods and services all over the country. It has become the fastest growing truck in the truck segment in India, and it was because it was small, it was priced at 5 lakhs, it was at a price point in which people could execute the last mile of delivery in India. Now, for those of you, all of you have grown up in India, you know that you can't get big trucks to execute the last mile of delivery in India. So you needed a product that was uniquely suited to Indian circumstances to execute that last mile in India. And we see this in all parts of the world, that there are amazing products and services that uniquely pay attention to local market conditions, and those products are succeeding remarkably well. So this is the second dimension on which global competition will progress, which is people will have to think hard about how can I do something that captures this new demand for consumption that will occur all over the world? And how do I do something that is uniquely responsive to local market conditions? So that's a sort of second thing that we're learning as we're looking at cases of global competition all over the world. And the third dimension, of course, is innovation. The third dimension of competition that occurs is innovation. And it's worth remembering that even though there's a lot of pride, and those of us who are from IIT and see ourselves as innovative, and certainly in this country we have done remarkable things as an IIT community to be innovative in America. It's worth recognizing that actually outside of the United States and Europe, there are very few examples of genuine global products that have been developed in any other part of the world. So if you take all pharmaceutical products, you take all consumer electronic products, you take most of the major products of the world for which there's global demand, these are global for global products, they still tend to be largely European or American. So if America is to sustain its lead in the world, I think that this is one of the things that America will have to continue to excel at. And as John was saying, this is why the extraordinary strength of American universities that has been there for a long period of time will have to continue to remain strong. That if American universities weaken, I think that this dimension of global competition, in which America has always had such a strong role, will also weaken. But we should not be confused. This is a contested terrain as we speak. So if you look at least patenting rates, and look at the top 10 companies in the world in terms of patenting rates now, 3 of them are no longer American. Samsung is now the second most aggressive patenting company in the world. And the best example that I had for this is I had the chance to meet the CEO of Volkswagen, and they're out trying to develop, as they did with the Beetle, a global car, and they hope that they will be the first developers of an electric car that will be a global car. So I was asking me, who are you most worried about in terms of who you think might be your best rival in this space? And I thought the answer would be either Toyota or General Motors. And to my great surprise, the competitor that he was most concerned about is BYD, which is a Chinese company that is out there trying to build a global car. Now, so even in this sphere, which is the sphere of where innovation will come from, where global for global innovation will come from, I think that we're living in a world in which competition will become much, much more widespread around the world. The other great opportunity for innovation that someone has to resolve is that if you believe that every consumer in the world will want to have the same basic sets of products and services that a US or European consumer enjoys, toaster ovens, refrigerators, TVs, just take the sort of standard product set that you would expect in any household in the United States or in Europe. If it gets produced with the same material and economic resources that we have been used to producing them today, there just aren't enough resources in the world. So if we're going to be able to supply demand around the world, we have to find a way of delivering today's goods and services at roughly 1/3 to 1/5 the material and cost resources today. And you see this happening now in terms of this spurring what Vijay Govindarajan and Tuck and others have called this great trend towards reverse innovation, which is let's take existing products and ask ourselves, how can we make them at a ridiculously different price point? So for example, there's this challenge that he has launched about, can we build a real house for $300? Because if we can, that's what affordable housing actually looks like. It doesn't look like what we think of as affordable housing in the United States or Europe. So this little framework that global competition will be on efficiency, which will be a constantly evolving frontier, local responsiveness, that the world will not homogenize into one set of consumers, that there will be in fact different markets in different parts of the world. And that we will need both global for global innovation, but also innovation where things that we know exist today can be done at a radically different material and price point. I think this is what the future of global competition looks like. And as Dean of Harvard Business School and John as the President of the university, this is what we have to prepare our students to navigate. This is the world in which we have to prepare them to work so that they can be people who will push the frontier in each of these three ways. Because that's the way the world will prosper. The world will prosper because we will get better at doing each of these three things. The strategy that various universities are pursuing varies a lot. John is building one of the great global universities. And at Harvard Business School, we're trying to do something a little different. Our view is that I want to have the world's largest global intellectual footprint with the smallest physical footprint. Because my view is that we will never be able to compete with Tsinghua in China in terms of understanding China better than Tsinghua. It's unlikely that I will be able to compete with IIM or ISB in India. I think that they will know India in due course of time and offer a better understanding of India than we will ever be able to offer. But there will always be, and I hope that there will always be, people who will want to come to Harvard Business School and great American universities. Because what we can offer them is because we are present through lean research centers in all parts of the world, a deep understanding, not even if it doesn't rival the understanding of Tsinghua in China, a deep understanding of what happens in China, what happens in Brazil, what happens in Africa, and what happens in all parts of the world. And this global education, preparing people to truly understand what happens all around the world, is something that we will only be distinctively able to do. I think this is the challenge that places like IIT and others will have to also navigate. That as the landscape for education itself becomes global, what is the niche that they will be able to credibly occupy over time? And every one of us, all of the universities that I know of, is today thinking about this matter because this is not just something that affects firms, it's something that affects universities as well. So I hope you found some of these remarks helpful. Again, I am deeply grateful to have this opportunity to speak to all of you, and I can't tell you how proud I feel of my time at IIT. It's what prepared me not to become a chemical engineer, which is what I studied, but for life. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nitin. So we're going to open the floor for questions. I just want to let you know that the organizing committee decided that anyone who asks a question, makes a statement before asking a question, they'll charge you $50. And there'll be volunteers standing, so keep your wallets open. And since I have the mic, I'm going to sort of